everyone. This morning, the U.S. government announced a strategic crypto reserve that was done by Donald Trump on social media. And this was something, there had been an executive order that he had issued creating a digital assets task force to study the creation of a stockpile. A stockpile is different than a strategic reserve because a stockpile basically means that the U.S. government is just going to sit on something it already has. Typically, a strategic reserve is something that the government buys more of and actually manages. So a strategic Bitcoin reserve is a lot bigger deal than the announcement of a stockpile. Previously, Donald Trump, prior to today, had only called it a stockpile and not a strategic reserve. The United States already has strategic reserves for petroleum, precious metals, and a variety of other things, just in case the global supply, gets cut off for some reason. So it is a big deal that the United States government is announcing a strategic crypto reserve. So the upside is it's a huge deal. Obviously, it's a strategic asset for the United States. It's much easier for other countries to adopt Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. A treasury reserve asset is another way of thinking about it or putting it. It's a lot easier for them to adopt it if the United States has already done that, as opposed to being the first country to do it. Now, El Salvador already is stockpiling Bitcoin, but they have a US dollar-based economy, so that they do not have the ability to buy anything with money that they make out of thin air. The U.S. government actually does have the ability to make money out of thin air with the U.S. dollar and then turn around and buy Bitcoin and other things with it. So extremely positive just for further solidifying Bitcoin as a big deal in the global economy, making it a lot easier for other countries to follow suit with the U.S. and establish their own strategic reserves. Also, there's a bunch of U.S. states that are evaluating strategic reserve legislation in their legislatures this year. It will become much more likely that they adopt Bitcoin as a strategic reserve if the U.S. government itself has adopted Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset. So it's a really big deal. So what are the downsides? The only downside is, well, I'm not a big fan of government, so obviously governments, which are a central coercive monopoly force, I am not a huge fan of governments having the best money in the world. I mean, I would tend to prefer the people have the best money in the world rather than governments, but it does help insulate Bitcoin from governments. If the governments own it, it aligns the incentives. So given a choice, I would rather the government own Bitcoin versus not, because it aligns the incentives instead of an us versus them, with the people owning Bitcoin and the government owning their own made up currencies out of thin air, like the US dollar. It at least puts everybody on the same page where, hey, we all own some Bitcoin. So that's a very good thing. The only downside is the strategic crypto reserve is not Bitcoin only. So it will include other cryptocurrencies, including some that, in my opinion, are completely outright scams, like XRP. So far, the announcement this morning from Donald Trump included Ethereum, which is has been just marching towards zero. It also includes Cardano and Solana and XRP. Of those, Ethereum and Solana at least arguably have some useful purpose, even if I would never invest in them. I do not think they're investment grade assets, and I think they will slowly march to zero, but at least you could plausibly argue that there is a use case in certain scenarios for Solana and Ethereum. One second. But in the case of XRP and Cardano, Cardano is basically a lost cause, in my opinion. It's been outcompeted 1,000 times over by Solana, and I just don't see how there's any value of having Cardano in a strategic crypto reserve. And XRP is just an outright scam. So the fact that we're going to put a scam token in a strategic crypto reserve is pretty stupid. But the reason they got that way is the people behind XRP have been dumping XRP on the unsuspecting population and making political donations with it. So the reward for making tons of political donations is they get XRP included in the strategic crypto reserve, even though it's a scam token that is not really used in any meaningful way in the real world. And the problem with all of these tokens, Ethereum, Solana, Cardano, and XRP, all four of them, is they all had huge what's called pre-mines, which is when the founders of the token invented a ton of the of the token out of thin air and then dumped it on the public. Bitcoin did not work that way. 100% of the Bitcoin that has ever come into existence, someone had to work for. They either had to expend electricity and computing power with Bitcoin mining, or they had to pay somebody that had done that, or they had to pay someone who already had it, who had paid someone who had done that. So 100% of Bitcoin is tied to real world scarcity and real world effort. And none of those other cryptos, none of them are that way. They're all basically made up out of thin air by the founding teams who then allocated a huge amount of it to themselves before it even started. And so they're all kind of scam tokens by that definition. But at least things like Ethereum, started so far ago that a large percentage of it is held by the public. In the case of XRP, a huge chunk of that is still owned by the founders, who every time the price goes up, they just dump it on the population and pocket the money. I mean, it's just like a classic perpetual pump and dump scheme. So anyway, but still hugely positive because the vast majority of the assets that will be in the strategic crypto reserve will be Bitcoin, because that's what the U.S. already owns based on Bitcoin that they confiscated way back in 2013 and 2014 from something called the Silk Road, which was a website that the government shut down and took all the Bitcoin way back in the day. So they've been sitting on a bunch of Bitcoin for a very long time, and the vast, vast, vast majority of what the U.S. government already holds is Bitcoin and not the other stuff. As a result of that, the vast majority of what is in the strategic Bitcoin crypto reserve will be Bitcoin, and over time, Bitcoin will outcompete everything else. And so it's going to end up being Bitcoin's going to end up being the vast, vast, vast majority, overwhelming lion's share of a crypto reserve anyway. It's just annoying that other stupid stuff ends up in there, especially XRP, which is just an outright scam, which is just stupid. But this comes on the heels of BlackRock announcing on Friday, after the markets closed, that they are including Bitcoin in a between 1% and 2% allocation of some of their model portfolios. So BlackRock is the largest money manager in the entire world. They manage something like $11 trillion in assets. And one of the things they do is provide model portfolios. These are model portfolios that they give to financial advisors and say, look, if you have clients that want to invest in alternative assets, then you should put them in this portfolio. And of course, that portfolio has a whole range of different, alternative assets. So they are adding between a 1% and a 2% Bitcoin allocation to some of those portfolios, which means anytime one of their financial advisors encounters somebody with a high risk appetite who likes alternative investments, meaning things other than just straight up, S&P 500 or Dow Jones Industrial Average sort of stocks, or just, plain vanilla bonds. Anytime somebody wants something more exotic or creative or higher risk than that, they can recommend a portfolio to that person. And that person, can end up in a BlackRock portfolio that has an automatic 2% allocation to Bitcoin. This is an absolutely huge deal. Not so much now, because the portfolios they're adding it to are comparatively small as a percentage of the $11 trillion. They're small by comparison. But because BlackRock has been consistently doing this, first they added it to sort of a portfolio that was sort of the sort of most out there portfolio. Then as of Friday is the first time they added it to a portfolio that is one of their model portfolios. The holy grail is ultimately to be added to the official gold standard BlackRock model portfolio that all of their clients get if you just show up at BlackRock and say, just put me in the standard thing. It's like ordering a number one meal at McDonald's or Wendy's or something. It's like, this is what most people buy, is the number one meal. That's why it's called number one at Chick-fil-A. It's the number one meal. So what BlackRock did is more like added Bitcoin to like the number seven meal. It's like, yeah, a lot of people buy the number seven meal, but way, 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 way more people buy the number one meal or the number two meal or the number three meal. A lot fewer people are ordering sort of the special, whatever it is, number seven meal or number four meal. Cause, I don't think Chick-fil-A has seven, but whatever the more obscure stuff on the Chick-fil-A menu is, that sort of stuff. So, but BlackRock is consistently climbing in the menu choices. So, they've added it to sort of the most obscure stuff. Now they're adding it to sort of the main menu, but it's sort of one of the less used main menu items. But it's very clear that BlackRock is just marching toward including it in more and more mainstream portfolios until I anticipate sometime this year they will announce that Bitcoin is a 1 to 2% allocation in their standard portfolio that everyone gets unless you ask for something different. I think it's highly likely that that happens this year, and they've been building toward that with a lot of smaller moves for a long time. And obviously, that portfolio is massively large, and it ends up with that ends up being a significant buyer of Bitcoin. Um, so the combination between Friday after market close of the news from BlackRock and today on a literal Sunday morning when Donald Trump announces the creation of this strategic crypto reserve, probably the funniest things is that the markets are closed. So if you own the real Bitcoin, if you have a Coinbase account, you can buy more Bitcoin all day long right now. Like on a Sunday afternoon, you can buy more Bitcoin. But if you are on Wall Street and you want to buy Bitcoin and your only way of doing it is one of the Bitcoin ETFs, well, guess what? The markets don't open until Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. Central Time, which is 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That's when the markets open. So tough luck. If you want to buy Bitcoin on a Sunday because you saw, or on a Saturday, if you saw after the markets closed the BlackRock announcement, you're stuck. The traditional markets can't buy Bitcoin with the ETFs because it was after market close. So you're stuck. You see this huge announcement on Friday after the markets close from BlackRock. There's nothing you can do about it except buy the real Bitcoin. And then all day Saturday, there's nothing you can do about it except buy the real Bitcoin. And then it's Sunday and you see a strategic crypto reserve announced by Donald Trump. And there's literally nothing you can do about it other than buy the real Bitcoin. And the Asian markets are going to open later today and overnight. And if you want to buy Bitcoin, there's nothing you can do in the United States except buy the real Bitcoin because the U.S. markets are closed. If you are on Wall Street and your only mechanism to buy Bitcoin is one of the Bitcoin exchange traded funds, the ETFs, then you can't buy that until 9:30 a.m. Eastern time when the markets open, which I just think is hilarious because it just means everybody who's buying the real Bitcoin gets to once again front run Wall Street. You get to buy Bitcoin right now before the markets open. Or on Friday when BlackRock made their announcement, and I posted on Facebook that this is a big deal. Or all day yesterday, you could buy as much Bitcoin as you wanted when the markets are, the stock market can't even buy Bitcoin if they wanted to because the markets are closed. So anyway, huge announcements. Bitcoin will be successful regardless. It is not like Bitcoin needs a strategic reserve to be successful. Bitcoin went from nothing to a $2 trillion global asset through President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, and now President Trump, through the thick and thin, through Choke Point 1.0, through Choke Point 2.0. Everything that the marketplace has ever thrown at Bitcoin has eventually emerged stronger. So did Bitcoin need this to be successful? No. Bitcoin was going to be successful absolutely no matter what. But it would have taken it a bit longer. So certainly this accelerates the worldwide global adoption of Bitcoin, even if Bitcoin would ultimately be the strategic reserve currency of the world in the long term, regardless. Even if the entire financial system would eventually be based on Bitcoin, no matter what, this certainly does accelerate that process. And hey, since that's a better world than the world we live in today, anything that accelerates that process is a good thing. So now continues to be a great time to buy Bitcoin, and two major announcements, one from BlackRock on Friday after market close, and one today, this morning, Sunday morning, from Donald Trump. And Bitcoin's in a great place, and exciting times ahead. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.